No moratorium, no reprieve. U.S. import duties went into effect at midnight. With confidence in the world's most powerful nation shattered, investors pulling their money from both stocks and bonds in the last trading days. Never a good sign. Most spectacular, 104% tariffs on China, which insists it won't come cap in hand to plead for mercy. Who blinks first between the world's top manufacturer and the world's top consumer? How does the rest of the world rethink trade, both with Beijing and Washington? Investors seek reliability and states that have strong and credible institutions. When UK Prime Minister Liz Truss in 2022 bypassed her own government services and went all in on trickle-down economics in her mini-budget, Parliament and the British media killed her rogue initiative fast. If this is Donald Trump's Liz Truss moment, then who to rein him in? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking who blinks first in this global trade war. With us from Brussels, Nicholas Vineker, editor-at-large for Politico Europe. Great to see you.
Good to see you again. Thanks for having me.
In a previous life, he was a member of the European Parliament for the UK Independence Party. From Lancaster, England, economist John Whittaker, senior teaching fellow at Lancaster University. Welcome to the show.
Yes, good evening.
From New York, Zongyang Liu, fellow for international political economy at the Council on Foreign Relations. Good to see you again. And we welcome back economist and data scientist Rémi Bourgeot, associate fellow at the French Institute for International and Strategic Affairs, IRIS. How are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
All right. Thanks, by the way, one and all, for listening. That's right, listening to the France 24 debate and subscribing wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, take a step back from the breaking news. And as the song goes, try to remember the kind of September when life was perhaps not so tender. 2022, the death of a queen on a brand new prime minister's watch. And then, against conventional wisdom, massive tax cuts that sent markets spinning.
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter.
Liz Truss would later sack her finance minister before falling on her own sword just after 49 days in office. Nicholas Vineker, is this Donald Trump's Liz Truss moment?
Well, that's certainly what some are saying. It might be time to break out the head of lettuce and start counting the days before it goes brown. Obviously, Donald Trump is not going to leave office. That's not how the U.S. political system works. But Congress could step in and put a stop to this tariff situation overnight if it wanted to. And what we're seeing is that the markets are piling pressure on Donald Trump. Some of his closest friends, some of his billionaire backers are turning against these tariffs and putting more pressure on Trump. It's even causing splits inside his administration, with Elon Musk attacking Peter Navarro, who we understand is the real hardliner on these tariffs. So there's political pressure piling on, and it could simply become too great at some point if we really enter kind of massacre territory in the markets for even Donald Trump to stand up to.
Right now, the Wall Street in positive territory by 1%, not enough to recoup much. John Whittaker, do you agree it could be a Liz Truss moment?
I don't think so at all. Liz Truss, as you point out, only lasted 49 days. Trump's been around a long time already. He's done quite a lot more damage than Liz Truss ever did. And in fact, after she had finished doing all the damage, everything was quickly reversed and we went back to normal. This isn't a Liz Truss event at all. It's far, far more dangerous than that. England recovered, Britain recovered from the problem. The world's not going to recover that quickly from Trump's antics here.
Even if Donald Trump reversed course tomorrow, it wouldn't recover quickly?
Well, look, come on. Donald Trump reversing course tomorrow is just not there. There's no point in trying to second guess what Donald Trump's going to do next. The stock market's been bouncing up and down like a yo-yo because everybody's waiting on Trump's next word, which is a pretty foolish thing to do. Let's not try and second guess Trump. Just wait till the whole thing settles down and let's take some action there. Everybody's knee-jerk reaction to what Trump's done is just what he loves. Everybody's waiting for him to come out with the next pronouncement. He loves it.
All right, the U.S. president on Tuesday serving up his version of I'm a fighter, not a quitter at the National Republican Congressional Committee dinner.
Don't let some of these politicians go around saying, because I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything. I'll do anything, sir. And then I'll see some rebel Republican, some guy that wants to grandstand, say, I think that Congress should take over negotiations. Let me tell you, you don't negotiate like I negotiate.
Zhang Yanlu, he made those remarks in front of an audience that included lawmakers. Your thoughts on vulgar language aside, Donald Trump's doubling down?
I think this is the part where, despite neither side, neither China nor the United States or the Trump administration would want to come into a deal with weaker hand, or the asymmetric bureaucratic arrangement right now prevent the two sides to start a trade negotiation. As you correctly pointed out, President Trump, he himself bragged about he being perhaps the best deal maker or negotiator, at least from his point of view. But in China, President Xi Jinping, he himself does not negotiate. A lot of the negotiations would have to be done by functionary agencies, and the role of President Xi Jinping is to come in towards the end and basically close the deal. So right now, we haven't seen President Xi Jinping directly make any response to President Trump's tariff hikes. So from that perspective, despite President Trump trying to hike up the pressure, we haven't seen the Communist Party of China or Chinese agencies wanted to give in, and they won't.
Because the criticism of Xi Jinping has been that over time he has consolidated his power and amassed more power into one single person than at any time since Mao. Is Donald Trump trying to do the same thing? Again, he's saying there that lawmakers don't matter. I'm the one that matters.
In a lot of ways, I'd say President Trump is not the first U.S. president trying to change some institutions, and he did not invent trying to maximize America's leverage to achieve certain things by resorting to coercion. And by contrast, Chinese President Xi Jinping, he is not the Chinese president invented self-reliance, and he's not the Chinese president to insist upon not yielding to foreign pressure. So a lot of analysts compare him to Chinese leader Chairman Mao Zedong, the founding father or Chinese version of George Washington. And if President Xi Jinping does consider himself along that line, then he has all the reasons to not give in. But so far, I would have to say, on both sides, probably the intention to de-escalate or to negotiate down the tariffs are there. But the functionary
I'm going to interrupt you because I want to go into the. I want us to talk more in depth about that exact point. Before we talk about it, I just want to get Rémi Bourgeau's reaction to the clip of Donald Trump that we heard. How do investors take it when they hear the President of the United States say, Congress doesn't matter, I'm the one who can negotiate?
Well, I think there's really a need for to reshuffle the global trading system, and lots of people are aware of that. Trump has his very own take on the issue, and he thought it would be a kind of short trade war. And it's not going to be the case. I mean, he wants to show he's entering into negotiations with all these countries. It might be true, and it is true when it comes to a certain number of countries, but that won't be the case with China.
Yeah, how do European? We've heard the leader of Italy's opposition take exception with Donald Trump bragging about European leaders coming to kiss his behind, because next week Giorgia Meloni is going to Washington.
Well, it's very different when it comes to Europe compared to China. For example, I mean, what we're starting to see in Europe is that they really want to find a way to calm the situation and to make huge concessions. Especially when it comes to the military, to armament, where there were all this talk of improving self-reliance in Europe, also when it comes to technology, the digital industries. And there's quite a great deal of disagreement also within the European Union. France was more in favor of putting that really on the table to how digital giants are being handled in Europe, and taxation in particular. But when you hear to leaders in Brussels, it's a bit different. They're more really going to that direction of accepting lots of claims that Trump has made.
All right. Just a final word on this point. Nicholas Vinegar. European investors, what do they think when they hear Donald Trump saying, I'm the only one who can negotiate?
European investors are a hostage of a situation that he has created, and the position of the investors is to want this to stop and want the tariffs to go away. But I got to take exception with something that was said just before. I don't agree with that assessment of the situation. Europe has been pretty unified, one, in embracing the defense ramp up as a response to Trump's sort of abandonment of Ukraine. And there has also been a united front on trade. We have hit back today against Trump. The strategy, as I hear it from diplomats in Brussels, is to wait a little bit and let the market chaos soften up the Trump administration. If this keeps going, it will pile pressure on him, and the Europeans will return with further retaliation against the tariffs. The idea now is to try to negotiate, is to try to find a deal. But from everything I've heard here, Europe is fully prepared to come back with another round of retaliatory tariffs if there's no room for negotiation. I don't think that the division is prevailing here. Of course, we got our usual suspects. Hungary voted against the first round of retaliation today. That's no surprise. And Giorgia Meloni has been sliding away from the European mainstream ever since Donald Trump got back into office. And she'll try to go there and do what she can, but there's no guarantee she'll obtain anything from Donald Trump. There's been no interest in any kind of concession to the EU. And I think the Europeans are going to take stock and not act in a knee-jerk way, but they will react over time if there's just no deal to be made with him.
All right, we're getting urgents coming in. The U.S. president speaking, saying he's going to suspend for 50 days some of these taxes outside of China. When it comes to China, though, raising them to 125%. Again, to keep score, it was 104% tariffs when the day began. Beijing responded with 84%. And now Trump taking it to 125. Anthony Kerrigan has more.
Faced with a 104% levy on all of their exports to the United States, China refuses to be intimidated.
The Chinese people's legitimate right to development is inalienable. China's sovereignty, security, and development interests are inviolable. We will continue to take firm and forceful measures to safeguard our legitimate rights and interests.
But Beijing knows very well that without the American market, they will need to form new relationships with new markets. Why not the EU? A 27-state customs union also reeling from new Trumpian tariffs. A 20% levy on all EU products as of Wednesday, in addition to the 25% on cars, steel and aluminium already in place. As the bloc prepares its own retaliation, Brussels are also advertising their contacts with Beijing.
President von der Leyen recalled the urgency for structural solutions to rebalance the bilateral trade relationship and ensure better access for European businesses, products and services to the Chinese market.
But the EU are wary of increased trade with China, conscious that an inrush of cheap Chinese products could threaten whole industries even more so than the US tariffs. With this in mind, the bloc implemented a 35% levy on Chinese EVs in 2024, a year in which the European Commission opened several investigations into Chinese products.
All right, so a difficult dance for the Europeans in the middle. And again, breaking news as we're speaking with Donald Trump at the same time, raising tariffs again for China and also announcing a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs for all but China. John Whitaker, the stock market is surging as a result. Earlier, you said that even if he reversed course, that's not going to repair the damage. Your thoughts after this announcement of a 90-day pause for all nations except China?
Well, that's today's news. What about tomorrow's news? Is there going to be a reversal again? Please, let's not do knee-jerk reactions all the time to whatever Trump says. It's a complete waste of space. Don't second-guess Trump. Let's cool it. Wait and see what happens a bit. The worst thing we can do is all get excited about it because the business relies on certainty, a view of the future that can allow them to make proper decisions. Just cool it, do nothing, relax. Let's not do anything knee-jerk here. And I want to point out also that Trump's antics will very soon become pretty unpopular amongst the American populace. You know, early on the BBC radio this morning, we heard that Trump was boasting about the fact that the tariffs are bringing in $2 billion extra to the US Treasury per day. You know, that's one of the motives he had for putting tariffs on it, help his budget. Well, fine. That money that he's getting in, that $2 billion, is actually taxed from the American people or American businesses. They're quite quickly going to come to realize what this is all about. Why should we pay Trump to have this trade war, which is going to cause us a load of trouble and cost us a lot of money at the same time? It's got to come home to them soon.
All right, advice there from John Whitaker, not to react every time Donald Trump opens his mouth. Markets, though, are reacting. The dollar is surging. Wall Street is surging. Rémi Bourgeot, you agree with John when it comes to this 90-day moratorium, that it could all change again tomorrow?
Yeah, we are in a regime of very high volatility when it comes to markets, and you can't read too much into all these announcements, which are mixed with rumors. And I think it's really important to focus on the long-term outlook, the long-term negotiations. For example, when it comes to Europe, Europe has a large trade surplus over the US. So there are different ways to somehow rebalance that. You can either increase imports of US goods in other sectors, for example, where we are already extremely dependent in goods and services, especially when it comes to the digital sector, services in particular. Also in armament, and on the other side, Europe and Germany in particular has a very large trade surplus in other goods like cars in particular. So I think the best way, and that's what should be discussed, is to decrease those exports and to invest more in the US. That's really one avenue to rebalance trade. But what is going to happen, I think, is more to increase dependencies, and Europe is also extremely dependent, over-dependent when it comes to some sectors like digital, US digital giants and armament. And I don't think there's so much agreement in Europe, because clearly you have different statements on that front. It's absolutely not about Hungary. I mean, there's always the same game on that. It's a different story. But I think we shouldn't confuse the short-term announcements and this kind of, the trade war rhetoric, and also longer-term negotiations that are much more important in the end, even though, of course, all this market chaos is much more focused on all the short-term announcements.
Again, Zongyang Liu, 104% tariffs jumping to 125% tariffs that Trump is slapping on China since this program began. Your thoughts?
I think this speaks to the nature of President Trump's willingness to use tariff as a threat. But again, I do not anticipate the Chinese President Xi Jinping comes out and say anything about it. The role of the president in China is not to be a deal maker. And on top of that, I think in terms of the level of competitiveness of Chinese exports, I talked with a lot of Chinese manufacturers. What they are afraid of is not tariffs. Rising tariffs, what they can do is to try to reduce their cost input. Now, this would have some costs, and potentially this would also force some industry consolidation inside China, potentially would lead to some rising unemployment, and it might also lead to some Chinese manufacturers trying to shift more of their productivity facilities overseas, trying to mitigate the impact of sanctions, and trying to mitigate the impact of tariff. A lot of this put pressures on the Chinese economy. But I would also emphasize that the Chinese government has already signaled their willingness to front load economic stimulus measures. They wanted to use a relatively progressive but progressively active monetary policy and fiscal policy, trying to do the necessary stimulus they need to stabilize the Chinese economy and to boost domestic consumptions.
And just very briefly on that, what you just said, how much could unemployment rise in China?
Right now, the Chinese unemployment has been relatively stable. Overall unemployment rate has been stable at around 5%. But youth unemployment rate is something that people are watching because China does have a lot of college graduates every year. And as a way to address this issue, President Xi Jinping has talked about encouraging Chinese youth to join the rural rejuvenization program. He also encouraged Chinese youth to be ready to eat the bitterness and to toughen up. And but then he also encouraged Chinese private business earlier this year to call on them to create more jobs. So from that perspective, I do worry the youth unemployment aspect of it. And despite the Chinese National Bureau of Statistics changed the way that they measure youth unemployment, but roughly some Chinese academics estimated that the real level of youth unemployment could be as high as over 20 or 30%.
Interesting, John Whitaker, that Song Yang was mentioning there, that one of the ripple effects of this trade war could be that there could be more Chinese goods flooding into other markets. And one of the questions that economists disagree about is, are we headed for inflation or a period of deflation?
Oh, hang on, you've got two questions in there. The first one about China. A few people are saying that actually Trump's actions are a gift to China because it makes Europe look more favorably on China. We've been rather saying we shouldn't be dealing with China for security reasons and other reasons. But now with America sort of going towards isolationism, it makes a motive there for Europe to work much more with China. And China will be delighted to do more business with Europe. So perhaps it's a win from that point of view. Just getting on to your inflation question. Yeah, I'm sure in the United States we can see short-term inflation. That's why the Fed is very reluctant now to be reducing interest rates, which is another problem which will come home to the American people in due course. Just one other point I want to make, actually, if I may, in response to Remy Bourgeois' point there. He seems to be striving for the European Union to help in reducing the bilateral tariff. Can I say a word or two about this?
Sure, go ahead.
Sure. The point is that Trump has been putting these bilateral tariffs against many other countries as a thing that has to be addressed. He says all other countries have been ripping him off. Well, the other side of that coin is the fact that the American currency, the dollar, is being used and held by other countries in the world. And that's the other side of the trade deficit, is the capital account surplus, which means dollars are used all over the world, and dollar then has the financial clout, the hegemony of the financial markets, which I think Trump would be rather loath to lose. You can't have it both ways. You either have trade deficits and a strong dollar and the influence that has over the financial markets, or you don't have either of them. So at some point, that must come home to people as well.
Nicholas Vinokur, at this point in time, should Europe expect inflation or deflation? And how do they handle China? We saw in that report earlier, there's still a lot of arguments between the EU and China, particularly when it comes to things like tech and electric vehicles.
Well, I think it's not very complicated when it comes to tariffs. They are inflationary. When those tariffs are imposed, that's an automatic increase on the items that are tariffed. So in the short term, definitely this is bad for consumers. There's just no two ways about it. It's pretty simple, and the idea that we're transferring wealth from the markets and from boomers and pensioners into the hands of young workers is really a stretch, because even the most conservative or the most optimistic scenarios say you're not going to bring back manufacturing jobs. It will take years to build a factory, to do
I'm going to interrupt you for a
term,
second. There's apologies, Nick, because we're going to cross to Washington and listen to the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent.
As I told everyone a week ago, they're in this very spot, do not retaliate, and you will be rewarded. So every country in the world who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you. We're going to go down to a 10% baseline tariff for them, and China will be raised to 125 due to their insistence on escalation.
Ed, go ahead. Treasury Secretary, thank you for doing this. Let me ask you three quick things, if I could, just for the sake of clarity, because the markets are open and they're wondering. First of all, Mexico and China, are they part of this 10% universal?
Well, China.
Mexico and Canada. Are they part of the 10%?
Yes.
Okay. Second, given then that you have the rest of the world essentially calling it, it's not China, is this now just all about China?
Well, it's about bad actors, and what we will see is some of the very early countries are China's neighbors. That we're going to see. I'm seeing Vietnam today. Japan's at the front of the queue. South Korea, India. So we will see. And as I've repeatedly said, and President Trump has been saying it for years, China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the modern world, and they are the biggest source of the U.S. trade problems. And indeed, they are problems for the rest of the world, because what we've seen is that as the U.S. announced a tariff wall last week, many of those goods have already started flooding into Europe.
So as you see it now, this trade war is China versus the rest of the world?
Well, I'm not calling it a trade war, but I'm saying that China has escalated, and President Trump responded very courageously to that, and we are going to work on a solution with our trading partners.
If I could just, excuse me, Raquel, if I could just add to what the Secretary said. Many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here. You tried to say that the rest of the world would be moved closer to China, when in fact we've seen the opposite effect. The entire world is calling the United States of America, not China, because they need our markets, they need our consumers, and they need this president in the Oval Office to talk to them. And that's exactly why more than 75 countries have called, because the United States of America is the best place in the world to do business. And as the president has shown great courage, as the Secretary has said, in choosing to retaliate against China even higher. Elena, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Treasury Secretary Bessent. Can you explain more of the decision-making on what feels like a reversal here? I mean, just these went into effect less than 15 hours ago, these tariffs. Why the pause now? What led to that?
No, again, President Trump created maximum negotiating leverage for himself, and which tariffs went into effect 15 hours ago. The ones that we have lowered went into effect a week ago. They were announced a week ago, and we've just been overwhelmed by response from mostly our allies who want to come and negotiate in good faith. So we are expecting them to come with their best deal. As I said a week ago today, don't retaliate, hold your ground, let's see what happens. And China, they kept escalating and escalating, and now they have 125% tariffs that will be effective immediately.
Mr. Secretary,
go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for doing this. The 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs, is that because of the whiplash that we've been seeing across the financial markets? How much was, what we saw in the stock markets, a part of this decision?
No, it's because because of the large number of inbounds, we've had more than 75 countries contact us, and I imagine after today there will be more. So it is just a processing problem. Each one of these solutions is going to be bespoke. It is going to take some time, and President Trump wants to be personally involved. So that's why we're getting the 90-day pause.
Mr.
Secretary,
Mr. Secretary, there was a tweet that you and Secretary Lutnick were in the Oval Office with the President talking about this. Can you talk about what that conversation was like and what you guys said to one another that led to this decision?
It's all the President's decision, and the President had a level in mind to raise the China tariffs, and then he had the 3-month pause in mind, and we were discussing the exact wording. Sorry? Of course.
It's the President's decision.
It's the President's decision. It was the President's decision to wait until today. And again, as I've said in the past, no one creates leverage for himself like President Trump.
Mr. Secretary. Shelby, go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, what does the President want to see by this, I think it's July 9th deadline to keep things paused? Is it just trade barriers coming down, or is it more than that?
These are trade negotiations, but if countries want to come and offer other things, I talked about yesterday that we are thinking about a big LNG project in Alaska that South Korea, Japan, Taiwan are interested in financing and taking a substantial portion of the offtake. But again, in essence, that is trade because it will decrease the trade deficit that we have with those countries. So everything's on the table.
Raquel, go ahead.
Secretary, a clarification on the pause. What happened to those countries who just had 10% baseline tariffs, like Brazil and others? Are they still going to have this 90-day pause? Because you were saying that there will be a tariff of 10% for others. So what happened to those who just had a 10%?
Yeah, that's going to remain.
And do you call this an embargo to China?
Pardon?
You call this an embargo to China, a trade embargo?
I'm not sure what you mean by the word embargo.
125% tariffs, like on those, and then impose 84%. Isn't this an embargo?
Well, it's not. It's China's decision that we have the deficit with them. They sell us almost 5 times what we sell them. So again, I think it's an own goal by China.
Mr. Secretary, Meredith. Mr. Secretary, with this, does this signal that you're confident that you're going to be able to strike a satisfactory deal with all these 75 nations that have approached you?
It signals that President Trump cares about trade and that we want to negotiate in good faith. And as I said, each one of these is going to be a separate, bespoke negotiation. So we are confident that having seen the other side of where this could go, and it was like I said last week, the market didn't understand. Those were maximum levels. The countries can think about those levels as they come to us to bring down their tariffs, their non-tariff trade barriers. We're going to discuss currency manipulation, subsidy of labor, and industry.
Secretary, thank you. Will the pause also apply to the sectoral tariffs that the President has announced, pharma, lumber, anything else?
No, it's on the reciprocal.
So those will still be coming here soon, right?
Mr. Secretary, as far as the
negotiations with the 75
Andrea, go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, so I want to ask you about what you're doing here. So the market is reacting crazily, right?
I haven't seen it.
Do you think that this move is going to change and calm down the market reaction?
What?
Do you think the markets have tanked, right? You know, there's been a lot of volatility in the market, not just in terms of stock markets, but also in terms of bonds. So will this move, in your mind, do you anticipate that this is going to calm the markets down?
Well, I think what we've seen, I think the willingness by more than 75 countries to come and negotiate, I think now the market understands that everything they saw last Wednesday was a ceiling, and now we have a 10% temporary floor. And I think the market, my 35 years in the market, I always wanted certainty, so I think we've got more certainty.
But Mr. Secretary,
Maggie, go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, why do people assume this is the last word? The president began this morning saying, be cool. 5 hours later, he announces a new policy. Why will investors in the market assume that this is it?
Because, again, as I said, we've given 90 days, and the only certainty we can provide is that the U.S. is going to negotiate in good faith, and we assume that our allies will too. And in terms of certainty, we will see what China does. But what I'm certain of is that what China is doing will affect their economy much more than it will ours, because they have an export-driven, flood the world with cheap export models, and the rest of the world now understands, because when we put up our tariff wall, those exports were already flowing to the rest of the G7 and to the global south.
And you think
Mr. Secretary, how much of this decision was driven by the bond market cratering overnight? What is happening with bonds? Is China selling their bonds?
I have nothing that says that, and we actually had quite a good 10-year auction today, and all this was, again, this was driven by the president's strategy. He and I had a long talk on Sunday, and this was his strategy all along, and that, you might even say that he goaded China into a bad position. They responded. They have shown themselves to the world to be the bad actors, and we are willing to cooperate with our allies and with our trading partners who did not retaliate. It wasn't a hard message. Don't retaliate. Things will turn out well.
What's your message to
Politico article saying that
Secretary,
the countries weren't getting
these
calls back.
negotiations with these 75 countries, how long will that take? Will it be a matter of weeks? Will it be a matter of months? Do you expect financial markets?
Live remarks by the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent after Donald Trump's reversal of course, a 90-day moratorium for reciprocal tariffs on all nations. There's a caveat, however, that 10% base universal tariff, that is still on, says Bessent, speaking to reporters, for all nations except one, China, still on 125% tariffs. Nicholas Vineker, you had the floor when the U.S. Treasury Secretary started speaking from the White House grounds. Your reaction to what you just heard?
They're presenting it as some kind of great victory that all these countries have come begging. Effectively, what they've given into is the market pressure. Another day of declines in the markets would be devastating in the U.S. And more people are coming out. You had Meghan Markle just now coming out and saying this is going to put us in a recession. And even if he lifts the tariffs on all the other countries, the tariffs on China are going to hurt the United States. That's more costs in grocery stores and buying consumer goods. There's just no way around that. It seems that the takeaway for all of America's trading partners is that this is completely unpredictable. It follows the whims of one person. It doesn't seem to follow any particular logic, rather than just sort of pushing for things and extracting leverage. The EU has been quite right to sort of wait and see for a while. But the EU did come to Donald Trump with an offer. Just the day before yesterday, Ursula von der Leyen offered Trump a 0 for 0 tariff offer, and that was rejected the very next day. So that contradicts what we've just heard from Mr. Bessent. The takeaway from this administration is it's unpredictable, it's chaotic, it doesn't provide security and predictability to investors.
Zhongyang Liu, when you heard Scott Bessent say this is going to hurt China a lot more because they have an export-driven economy, what was your reaction?
China, Secretary Bessent is right that China does have an export-driven economy, but at the same time, the Chinese government has also this time been putting a lot of emphasis to boost domestic household consumption. So from this perspective, I do agree with Nicholas' point in terms of rising tariff hurting the United States. Part of the reason is because if the point of a tariff is to rebuild American manufacturing, to boost America's export competitiveness, and this tariff would not achieve that goal. Part of the reason is because even if companies are willing to invest in the United States and build factories, that is going to drive up labor cost, land cost, and on top of that, rising tariff on China is going to make inputs to manufacturing activities in the United States more expensive. So a lot of this inflationary pressure is not going to help U.S. export, even if manufacturing can be brought back to the U.S.
And perhaps the lead buried in what we just heard, John Whitaker, the 10% universal tariff on every country, that is, again, still on the table. So 10% tariffs are huge, plus tariffs for specific industries, including some that haven't even yet come into effect, like pharmaceuticals.
It's all still there, which isn't good. We've all had small tariffs already. I mean, Europe and Britain have got small tariffs of about 3 to 5% or something. So this is certainly an escalation on that. And it's bad news for, well, I suppose, guys like me who really sort of think that free trade's a great idea. Can I just make a comment on Scott Bessent while I'm here? You know, he's talking about these countries coming to negotiate. What's negotiation? It's talking amongst yourselves to try to sort something out. They're not. He doesn't want them to come and negotiate. He's asking them to come and beg. You know, that's exactly what they're trying to do. This Trump administration loves that kind of behaviour by all the foreign leaders, heads of state coming over to beg for Mr. Trump. That's just what he loves to do. That's his modus operandi. It doesn't make for good business. It doesn't make for prosperous trade. It doesn't make for welfare for anybody in the world, actually. But that's the way that Trump works, unfortunately. But let's not call it negotiation, please.
Again, Rémi Bourgeot, if you're an investor, I say an investor, and you watch what we just saw with, I guess, the Treasury Secretary in the role of the good cop and the White House spokesperson in the role of the bad cop with a more muscular rhetoric, what do you say to yourself?
Well, I think there's some relief that the situation has somehow clarified.
Would you, if you're a French investor, would you invest your money in the U.S. right now?
Well, I don't know, but I'm very worried about this situation. I mean, it's more than a trade war. I mean, it's clarified now. They're already targeting China and trying to take allies on board, but it's more than a trade war. It's really an embargo now when you see such high tariffs. And it's not just about the inflationary impact. It's really going to disrupt supply chains. So it's really going to have a very destructive effect on the world economy. On the other side, since other countries, especially in Asia, are exempted, China will have a way to redirect its exports to the US via those countries, which it has already done in the past. But there's really clearly an escalation, a political and economic escalation between China and the US, and there's no real end in sight. And also China has diversified a lot over the past few years. It has increased in terms of sophistication, and it's far less reliant. I mean, exports to the US are still extremely important for China, but my main worry is it's going to last.
We're almost out of time, Nicholas Winokur, but again, we heard that phrase repeated several times. It's all the president's decision. Just very briefly, is it all the president's decision when it comes to the U.S. position? Are there other players that can temper Donald Trump?
Well, it would seem not. We've heard from EU officials that Mr. Lutnick, Mr. Greer don't have much influence, and that this is really being decided by Trump and Peter Navarro, and maybe that's it. I think they are sensitive to the extreme volatility on the markets. Those are their friends. Those are their rich friends saying, hey, Donald, you got to stop this somehow. And that's what we've seen today, really sooner than expected. Just last night, Donald Trump was telling people to hold steady. Everything is going to be fine. And he's kind of given in with this pause today as people come in. But indeed, that's what the view is here. This does sit with Trump and with his really inner tightest circle, and there's not much influence anyone can have on him.
All right, we'll continue to follow it. Nicholas Vinegar, many thanks for joining us from Brussels. I want to thank John Whitaker for being with us from Lancaster, Zongyang Liu in New York City. Rémi Bourgeot, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.